7:47 a.m., Wednesday, March 20th, 2024. The Gulf Stream G. 6:5. O's starboard engine exploded at 95 knots, black smoke erupting like a fist punching through metal and hope. Marcus Tate stood 200 feet from the runway, tablet trembling in his dark hands, the screen's red warning still glowing. Critical failure. Probability, 81%. Victoria Sterling stumbled down the emergency slide, her $4,000 suit jacket torn at the shoulder, hair escaping its severe bun. Through the acrid smoke and chaos of sirens, her eyes found him across the tarmac. Blue fire meeting brown guilt, and her voice cut through the screaming foam trucks with surgical precision. "You cleared this aircraft." Marcus's throat closed. Horror, vindication, and something worse. The sick certainty of a prophet nobody believed until the flood came, twisted in his chest. He'd known. God help him, he'd known exactly what would happen, down to the 1,000-foot mark where Captain Rodriguez would slam the brakes, down to the Stage 3 compressor blade that would shatter into titanium shrapnel. He'd known, and he'd signed the clearance anyway. Cut to black, 9 hours earlier, 10:30 p.m., Tuesday night. Marcus woke to darkness and the familiar weight of failure pressing against his ribs. The Oakland studio apartment smelled like instant coffee and the particular loneliness of men who'd traded everything for work that no longer wanted them. Digital clock, 10:47 p.m. He'd been asleep 90 minutes, maybe less. Insomnia had become a third shift he couldn't clock out of. Unpaid overtime in the warehouse of regret. Divorce papers sat on the pressed board table, finalized 8 months ago, but still carrying Denise's perfume, or maybe that was memory, the ghost scent of 28 years evaporating into legal language. The wedding photo lay face down beside them. Marcus hadn't looked at it since July, but he knew every pixel. Denise at 26, radiant in ivory lace. Himself at 28, believing love and competence were enough to build a life on. Turns out competence with turbofan engines didn't translate to competence with human hearts. The flashback hit without permission, sharp as sheet metal. 2 years ago, autumn 2022, Denise standing in their Alameda kitchen with suitcases already packed. Her voice had been quiet, which somehow made it worse than shouting. "You loved those planes more than you ever loved me, Marcus. 28 years I came second to blueprints and compressor ratios and one more diagnostic. I'm done being the thing you fit in between shifts." He tried to argue, to explain that providing meant sacrifice, that his obsession with precision kept families safe at 40,000 feet, that she was being unfair. The words had died in his mouth when he saw her face, not angry, just exhausted. Done. She'd left that night, and the silence she left behind had its own weight, its own gravity that pulled everything into its orbit. Marcus pushed himself off the futon, joints protesting. 52 felt older at 11 p.m. than it did at dawn. The bathroom mirror showed a face he barely recognized. Gray threading through close-cropped hair, lines carved deep around eyes that had stared at too many engine diagnostics, a jaw that still clenched even in sleep. His grandfather's face stared back. The Tuskegee airman mechanic who'd taught 8-year-old Marcus that physics defeated prejudice, that a black man with a wrench and knowledge could make millionaires trust him with their lives. Somewhere between that lesson and tonight, Marcus had forgotten the second part, that trust was sacred, not transactional. His phone glowed with email notification number 47. Boeing had rejected his application again, this time without the courtesy of a form letter, just silence. Age discrimination wore 1,000 masks. Overqualified, not a culture fit, pursuing other candidates. But it always came down to the same math. 52-year-old engineers cost more than 26-year-old engineers with fresh degrees and no mortgage, no child support, no inconvenient ideas about how things should be done. 18 months since Boeing's restructuring had restructured him right out of a career. Senior aerospace engineer, $145,000 a year. Corner office. Respect. Gone. Replaced by Tyler and Jaden and Emma, bright kids with their whole lives ahead of them and no memory of when planes were built by people who understood that good enough never was. Now Marcus Tate made $58,000 doing pre-flight inspections at Apex Aviation, checking rich people's toys for problems they wouldn't believe existed until catastrophe proved him right. The fall from engineer to mechanic felt less like a career change and more like a moral demotion, purgatory in coveralls. The worst part wasn't the money or the title. The worst part was Isaiah. His son's graduation photo hung on the wall, the only decoration Marcus had bothered with. Isaiah Tate, Purdue engineering class of 2023, cap and gown and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. 24 years old and already following his father into an industry designed to chew up men like them and spit out quarterly earnings reports. Marcus had pushed him toward aerospace, told him physics and precision mattered, that excellence spoke louder than prejudice. Another lie he'd believed at 28 that 52 knew better. Isaiah worked at Apex too, had for 7 months now, deliberately on different shifts. Their last real conversation had been 4 months ago, November. Isaiah's voice tight with a frustration that sounded too much like Denise's exhaustion. "Stop trying to teach me, Dad. I'm not you. I don't need your constant corrections, your better way to do things, your disappointment when I don't meet standards you never explained. I'm 24. Let me figure it out." Marcus had tried to explain he wasn't disappointed, just trying to help, trying to pass down what his grandfather and father had given him. But Isaiah had walked away mid-sentence, and Marcus had let him go because he didn't know how to love without instruction, didn't know how to connect without correction. Perfectionism had cost him his marriage. Now it was taking his son. Marcus moved to the kitchenette, poured whiskey into a coffee mug because all the glasses were dirty. 2 fingers, neat. The burn was familiar, reliable. Outside, Oakland's night sounds filtered through thin walls. Sirens, bass from a passing car, someone's argument in Spanish bleeding through the ceiling. This apartment cost $1,800 a month and felt like a cell he'd sentenced himself to. His phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow Sterling G650-0500 arrival. Hollis says you're on pre-flight, don't screw it up." Victoria Sterling's aircraft. Marcus had worked on it twice in the past month since she'd made him her personal mechanic, an arrangement that still felt like charity dressed in corporate efficiency. Garrett Hollis, his supervisor, hated the setup, hated that a billionaire had overridden facility hierarchy, hated that Marcus got special treatment, hated that a 52-year-old black man with ideas above his station kept pointing out problems with perfectly acceptable tolerances. Marcus drained the whiskey, felt it settle into the familiar hollow where purpose used to live. Sleep wouldn't come, not for hours, so he did what he always did, pulled up technical manuals on his laptop, studied blade degradation patterns in BR725 turbofan engines, lost himself in the clean certainty of mathematics where variables behaved predictably and consequences followed rules. At 3:47 a.m., something in the data caught his eye. A pattern he hadn't noticed before, maintenance logs cross-referenced with flight hours and ambient temperature variations. His chest tightened. He'd review the Sterling jet's specific history in the morning, but already his instincts were whispering warnings his training had taught him to trust. The alarm went off at 4:15 a.m. Marcus had been awake for 17 hours. 5 a.m., Wednesday, March 20th, Apex. Aviation sat on the eastern edge of San Francisco Bay, where private jets for people who measured time in millions of dollars waited in climate-controlled hangars, like thoroughbreds in air-conditioned stables. The facility handled exclusively ultra-high net-worth clients, tech CEOs, venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, the occasional Hollywood producer. If your net worth had fewer than 9 digits, you flew commercial. Marcus parked his 15-year-old Toyota Camry in the employee lot between a newer Honda and a Tesla. The sunrise broke over the East Bay hills, painting everything gold and false promising. He grabbed his lunch cooler and toolkit, the weight of them comfortable in hands that had held worse. The security checkpoint guard, Ramon, third shift, 2 kids in community college, nodded him through without the usual small talk. Word traveled fast in facilities like this. Everyone knew Marcus was Victoria Sterling's special project, which meant half the guys respected his expertise and the other half resented his privilege. Both sides kept their distance. The locker room smelled like industrial soap and old coffee. Marcus changed into navy coveralls, his name embroidered over the left pocket in yellow thread. M. Tate. The embroidery was crooked, done by a machine that needed calibration nobody would pay for. He'd offered to fix it once. Hollis had told him to stay in his lane. Isaiah's locker was 3 down from his, nameplate bright and straight, I. Tate. Empty inside except for a spare work shirt and a Purdue engineering decal his son had never removed. Marcus stared at it longer than necessary, then closed the locker door softly, the click loud in the empty room. The main hangar floor was already buzzing. 3 jets scheduled for departure before noon, which meant inspections, refuelings, system checks, a dozen moving parts that had to synchronize perfectly or someone's quarterly earnings call got delayed. Apex prided itself on efficiency. Safety was assumed, not celebrated. Garrett Hollis stood near the dispatch board, clipboard in hand, gut straining against a polo shirt embroidered with the Apex logo. 54, white, 27 years in private aviation, and the kind of manager who confused following procedures with understanding principles. He saw Marcus approaching and his mouth tightened into what might have been a smile on someone with more warmth. Tate, Sterling's G650, Bay 4. Pre-flight inspection. She wheels up at 0800 sharp. Marcus took the work order. Standard checklist. Just follow protocol, Tate. Don't improvise. We clear billionaires' jets here, not redesign them. The dig landed where Hollis intended. Marcus had made the mistake, twice, of suggesting Apex's inspection intervals didn't account for exponential degradation in composite materials under thermal stress. Hollis had made it clear that Marcus's MIT-level analysis wasn't welcome in a shop that ran on manufacturer recommendations and liability insurance. Yes, sir. Hollis's eyes narrowed at the sir, trying to detect sarcasm, finding only the smooth professionalism Marcus had learned to wear like Kevlar. After a beat, Hollis moved on to bark at a younger mechanic about fuel samples. Marcus walked toward Bay 4, toolkit swinging. The Gulfstream G650 sat under LED floods like a museum piece, $65 million of aerodynamic art, swept wings, twin Rolls-Royce BR725 engines, a fuselage that promised to carry 8 souls across continents at Mach 0.9. Beautiful, efficient, and Marcus's gut whispered, potentially lethal. He pulled out his tablet, loaded the digital inspection checklist, and began the methodical work that had defined 48 years of his life. Fuel systems, check. Hydraulics, check. Electrical, check. Landing gear, check. He moved with the economy of motion that came from repetition measured in decades, each test performed exactly to specification because lives depended on exactly. At 6:15 a.m., as he was checking blade clearances on the starboard engine, something 90% of mechanics skipped because it took 12 extra minutes. A voice cut through his focus. "You're checking blade clearances. Most mechanics skip that." Marcus straightened, turned. Victoria Sterling stood 10 feet away, and he felt his stomach drop because she wasn't supposed to be here. Not this early, not unannounced. She wore tailored black slacks and a charcoal blouse that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her silver hair pulled back severe enough to hurt, blue eyes sharp behind rimless glasses that didn't hide anything. 56 years old and radiating the particular confidence of people who'd turned 40 million inherited dollars into 4 billion earned ones. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, buying time to shift mental gears. Most mechanics don't care if you die at 40,000 feet, Ms. Sterling. Her eyebrow lifted fractionally. The silence stretched 3 seconds longer than comfortable. You know who I am. Yes, ma'am. He gestured at the fuselage. Your registration's on the tail and your photos in the Wall Street Journal twice a month. But you didn't recognize me immediately. Not a question, an observation. Marcus shrugged. I was focused on turbine clearances. Faces are secondary to physics. Something shifted in her expression, too quick to read. She stepped closer, heels clicking on concrete, and Marcus was suddenly aware of the class distance between them, measured in everything that mattered to America: wealth, education, power, the casual assumption that the world would rearrange itself for your convenience. What's your name? Marcus Tate, ma'am. Why are you doing pre-flight inspections, Mr. Tate? You check clearances like someone trained beyond minimum certification. The question landed in territory Marcus had learned to navigate carefully. Truth had costs in places like Apex. Because corporations throw away 52-year-old engineers like expired milk, Ms. Sterling. Cheaper to hire kids fresh out of college who don't question efficiency metrics that put passengers at risk. Victoria's eyes sharpened. Most people, nearly everyone Marcus had met in 28 years, spent their first 10 seconds with billionaires trying to impress them, flatter them, position themselves for opportunity. He'd just told her an uncomfortable truth delivered with the tone of a man who'd stopped caring about advancement, because advancement had stopped caring about him. Most people kiss my ass within 10 seconds of meeting me. Most people want something from you. And you don't? Marcus looked at her directly. The kind of eye contact that crossed professional boundaries but told truth. I want to keep you alive, ma'am. Past that, my needs and your ability to meet them don't intersect. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. She pulled out her phone, tapped something, then looked back at him. How many years in aerospace? 28. 12 at Boeing, senior engineer. Laid off June 2022, age discrimination dressed as restructuring. 16 months unemployed, now here. Education? Purdue, aerospace engineering, 1996. Night classes at Stanford for advanced propulsion systems, 2008. Victoria studied him like he was a balance sheet that didn't reconcile. I'm going to ask you 3 technical questions, Mr. Tate. Answer honestly. If you don't know, say so. Marcus waited. On a BR-725 turbofan at cruise altitude, what's the compressor pressure ratio at max continuous thrust? 30-1 approximately. Varies with ambient temperature and aircraft weight. If you lose hydraulic system A and B simultaneously at flight level 450, what's your flight control redundancy? Electric backup actuators on primary surfaces. You'll have reduced authority and higher control forces, but you can fly and land, assuming the electric system hasn't failed for the same reason the hydraulics did. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Explain that last part. Common cause failures don't show up in redundancy charts, Ms. Sterling. If an engine disintegration takes out hydraulic lines in both systems, shrapnel probably hit the electric system too. On paper, you've got backup. In reality, you're praying. She was quiet for a moment. Last question. What's the thermal expansion coefficient for titanium aluminum vanadium alloy under cyclic stress at 400 degrees Celsius? Marcus recited the number from memory, then added what she hadn't asked. But that's theoretical. In practice, blade degradation isn't linear. Microfractures propagate exponentially, especially past 80% of tolerance limits. That's why manufacturer maintenance schedules are minimums, not targets. They're calculated for average conditions, not worst case. Victoria lowered her phone. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from interrogation to something harder to define. I need someone who tells me truth, not what I want to hear. Interested in a proposition? Marcus felt the weight of the question, the dangerous opportunity embedded in it. Depends on the proposition. Be my personal mechanic for my fleet, 6 months. You report only to me, override Hollis when needed on safety calls. Double your current salary. The number hit Marcus in the chest. $116,000 would erase debts, rebuild savings, maybe let him sleep past 4 a.m. without financial panic clawing him awake. It would also make him Victoria Sterling's pet expert, the house mechanic who existed to make a billionaire feel safe while everyone else at Apex treated him like he'd sold out for money. And it would prove to Isaiah that his father would take anything, compromise anything, for the paycheck he claimed didn't matter. Why me, Ms. Sterling? Because you checked blade clearances nobody checks. Because you answered my questions without trying to impress me. Because you don't need this job enough to lie to me. Which means when you tell me something's unsafe, I can trust you mean it. Marcus looked at the G650, at the starboard engine where he'd been interrupted mid-inspection, at the perfectly normal readings that his gut was already whispering weren't normal enough. I'll do it, but I need one thing clear. What? If I tell you an aircraft's unsafe, you don't fly. No negotiation, no second opinions, no just this once because you've got a meeting. You ground it, or I walk. Victoria extended her hand. Her grip was firm, cool, businesslike. Deal. But understand something, Mr. Tate. I've built 14 companies by trusting my judgment. If you cry wolf, if you ground aircraft without cause, our arrangement ends. They shook. Marcus felt the future shift, doors opening and closing simultaneously. When do I start? You already have. Finish this inspection. I'll inform Hollis of the new arrangement. She turned, heels clicking away, leaving Marcus alone with a $65 million aircraft and the queasy certainty that he'd just made a deal he didn't fully understand. 20 minutes later, Garrett Hollis appeared, face red, moving fast. What the hell did you say to her? Marcus didn't look up from the port engine diagnostic. The truth. You're off facility rotation. Sterling's fleet only, report directly to her. You just made yourself every mechanic's problem, Tate. Wasn't aware I was solving anyone else's problems, Garrett. Hollis stepped closer, voice dropping to the register of threats disguised as advice. You think you're special because a billionaire likes your analysis? You're a checkbox, Tate. Diversity hire with gray hair. She'll get bored, you'll be back on rotation, and I'll make sure you remember what happens when you forget your place. Marcus straightened, met Hollis's eyes. 52 years of swallowing insults and institutional racism had taught him exactly how far he could push before crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. My place is keeping people alive, Garrett. Past that, I don't have a place, and neither do you if one of these jets falls out of the sky because we cleared it to minimum spec instead of actual safe. Hollis's jaw worked. Before he could respond, a voice cut through the hangar. Dad. Isaiah Tate stood 30 feet away, tool belt hanging from narrow hips, his face a younger version of Marcus's but smoother, unscarred by divorce and downsizing. 24 looked impossibly young from 52's perspective, all potential and unbroken faith in merit. Marcus's chest tightened. They hadn't spoken in 4 months beyond shift change nods. Isaiah. His son walked closer and Marcus searched for warmth in those eyes, found instead something harder. Disappointment, maybe, or embarrassment. So you're her charity case now. The words landed like blade strikes, precision cuts in exactly the right places. Marcus forced his voice steady. I'm her mechanic. She made an offer. I accepted. Of course you did. Isaiah's laugh was bitter. Can't get hired as an engineer, so you take the billionaire's pity job. That'll show Boeing you're not washed up. Marcus wanted to explain about the money, the opportunity, the chance to do work that mattered without Hollis's incompetence hovering over every decision. But explaining felt like defending, and defending felt like admitting Isaiah was right. It's honest work. So was what you were doing yesterday. But yesterday you weren't Victoria Sterling's pet project. Isaiah, forget it, Dad. Do what you need to do, you always have. His son walked away, shoulders tight, and Marcus let him go because he didn't know how to close the distance without making it wider. Hollis watched the exchange with something like satisfaction, then left without another word. Marcus stood alone in Bay 4, surrounded by the most advanced private aircraft in commercial production, and felt more isolated than he had in the Oakland apartment at 2 a.m. He finished the inspection in silence. Everything checked normal. Everything felt wrong. 7:05 a.m., 3 weeks later, April 10th, 2024. Marcus arrived at Apex at 4:30 a.m., 45 minutes earlier than his shift required. Because Victoria Sterling had a board meeting in New York and her G650 needed pre-flight inspection before the 8 a.m. departure window. 3 weeks into their arrangement, he'd learned her patterns. She flew twice weekly, always precisely on schedule, always with the same mix of executives and assistants whose names Marcus didn't bother learning because they treated mechanics like furniture. The hangar was empty except for night shift finishing cleanup. Marcus used his new security clearance, another privilege that earned resentment, to access Bay 4 where the G650 waited. He'd inspected this aircraft 11 times in 3 weeks, knew its quirks, the port hydraulic actuator that ran 0.3 pounds per square inch low, the electrical bus tie that occasionally threw nuisance warnings, the coffee stain on the galley counter from some executive's carelessness. Familiarity bred patterns, and patterns bred assumptions, and assumptions killed people. Marcus pulled out his tablet, loaded the inspection checklist, and began the ritual that kept souls airborne. At 7:05 a.m., when he connected the diagnostic interface to the starboard engine's digital control unit, his stomach dropped. N1 compressor vibration amplitude 0.00298 millimeters, within tolerance. The manufacturer's spec allowed up to 0.005 millimeters. By every official standard, this number was green, safe, acceptable. Marcus stared at it anyway because his grandfather's voice was whispering in his ear. Trust the math, boy, but trust your gut when the math feels wrong. He pulled up the maintenance history, cross-referenced flight logs with ambient conditions, and started doing calculations that would have seemed paranoid to anyone without 3 decades watching metal fatigue kill people. 14 months ago, January 2023, blade wear measured at 0.43 millimeters within the 0.5 millimeters tolerance limit. Garrett Hollis had signed the inspection. 9 months ago, July 2023, compressor efficiency test showed marginal performance within acceptable range. Hollis cleared it. 4 months ago, December 2023, vibration noted at 0.0027 millimeters within spec. Hollis approved. Marcus pulled out his personal notebook, paper, not digital because some thoughts needed the permanence of ink, and started mapping degradation curves. Titanium, aluminum, vanadium alloy blades didn't wear linearly. Microfractures propagated exponentially, stress concentrations multiplying with each thermal cycle, each transition from ground idle to takeoff thrust, each slam from cruise altitude cold to landing approach heat. At 0.43 millimeters 14 months ago, the blade had been at 86% of tolerance. Normal procedure said recheck at the next interval, 18 months. But exponential degradation didn't care about procedures. Marcus ran the numbers 3 times, checking his assumptions, questioning his paranoia. Same answer every iteration. Current blade wear projected 0.47 millimeters, 94% of tolerance. Thermal expansion at cruise altitude given forecast conditions. 52 degrees Fahrenheit on ground, 68 degrees Fahrenheit predicted at flight level 450, would add approximately 0.018 millimeters of effective clearance loss. Total effective clearance under operational stress, 0.488 millimeters, 97.6% of maximum allowable tolerance. But that wasn't the number that made Marcus's hands shake. The number that mattered was probability of catastrophic failure under these conditions, given the exponential stress curve, given the aircraft's flight profile to New York over the Rocky Mountains, given 8 souls on board who trusted machines maintained by people who confused legal minimums with actual safety. 81%. Marcus photographed the diagnostic screen, time-stamped 7:18 a.m., saved it to 3 separate locations, tablet, phone, personal cloud account. When this went wrong, because 81% meant it would go wrong, he needed proof that he'd seen it, documented it, tried to stop it. He walked fast toward the facility office, found Garrett Hollis reviewing paperwork with coffee stains on the duty roster. "Garrett, the Sterling jet needs grounding." Hollis didn't look up. "Good morning to you too, Tate." "The starboard engine. N1 compressors showing degradation patterns consistent with imminent failure." Now Hollis looked up, annoyance sharpening into something meaner. "I cleared that aircraft 2 days ago. Ran full diagnostics. Everything's within spec." Marcus put his tablet on Hollis's desk, showed him the numbers, the maintenance history, the exponential curve he'd calculated. Spec doesn't account for thermal expansion under operational stress. The blade wear's been progressing for 14 months and every inspection barely cleared minimums. That's not coincidence, Garrett. That's a pattern. Hollis studied the screen for maybe 10 seconds, then pushed the tablet back. "You're overthinking, Tate. This is why engineers make bad mechanics. Too much theory, not enough practical sense. People will die if that compressor fails at altitude. People will lose their jobs if I ground a billionaire's jet for numbers within tolerance." Hollis leaned back, arms crossed. "You know why Victoria Sterling's buying this facility?" Marcus went still. "What?" "Morrison's been negotiating for 6 months. Sterling wants to vertically integrate her aviation services. Contract says 0 delays for 6 months or the deal's off." Hollis let that hang. "You ground this jet, deal dies, Apex closes, 127 people unemployed, including your son." The words hit like turbulence, violent and disorienting. Marcus's mind raced through implications. Isaiah finally building a career, finally getting out from under his father's shadow, finally proving he could succeed independent of Marcus's interference. All of it contingent on Marcus staying quiet about an 81% failure probability. "You're asking me to clear an unsafe aircraft to protect a business deal." "I'm telling you the numbers are within spec, Tate. The rest is just math you're choosing to interpret one way when a dozen other engineers would interpret different." Hollis's voice went soft, almost kind. "You want to be right, or you want Isaiah to have a future?" Marcus felt the trap close. This was the choice excellence demanded. Integrity or survival, truth or family, the math that saved lives versus the economics that paid bills. "Give me 30 minutes. Let me run one more diagnostic, verify the readings." "You've got 15 Sterling boards at 0745. Marcus walked back to Bay 4, legs moving automatically while his mind spun through options. He could call the FAA directly, report the aircraft as unsafe. They'd investigate eventually, maybe ground it pending review. Definitely end his career and Isaiah's by association. He could refuse to sign the clearance, let Hollis do it, wash his hands of responsibility while 8 people climbed into a metal coffin. Or he could trust 3 decades of expertise, stand on the certainty that he was right and the system was wrong, and accept whatever consequences came from choosing lives over livelihoods. At 7:35 a.m., Isaiah appeared in Bay 4's entrance. Marcus's heart lurched. "Isaiah, what are you doing here?" His son walked closer and Marcus saw something in his face. Overhead lights catching fury and fear mixed together. "I heard you talking to Hollis. You're going to ground Sterling's jet. The compressor's failing." Don't, Isaiah's voice cracked. For once in your life, Dad, don't be the smartest guy in the room who has to prove everyone else wrong. Marcus tried to find words. Son, this isn't about being right. The math is clear. Your math destroyed our family. Isaiah's shout echoed off metal walls. Mom left because you were always right. Every argument, every decision, every goddamn thing had to be your way because you knew better. And now you'll destroy my career the same way? Isaiah, 8 people's lives are based on your interpretation of data that Hollis says is fine. Who's right, Dad? You or the guy with 17 years at this facility? You or the manufacturer's specs that literally say those numbers are safe? Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. I've been doing this longer than Hollis. You've seen your own failure, and now you need everyone else to fail too so you don't feel so alone. Isaiah's face twisted. I'm 24. I'm finally building something separate from you. Finally getting respect that isn't Marcus Tate's son. And you're going to take that away because you can't stand someone else being right. The accusation landed in places Marcus hadn't known were vulnerable. He'd spent 4 months wondering why Isaiah avoided him, blamed it on pride or youth or the natural separation of generations. He'd never considered that his son saw him not as a standard to aspire to, but as a cautionary tale to escape. Isaiah, I'm trying to protect. Don't protect me, Dad. You've done enough damage protecting people who didn't ask for it. His son walked away, shoulders rigid, and Marcus stood frozen because moving felt like admission and standing still felt like cowardice. At 7:45 a.m., Victoria Sterling arrived with her entourage. 2 executives Marcus vaguely recognized from previous flights. Her executive assistant Rachel with the permanent phone glued to her ear. Captain Rodriguez already in uniform running pre-flight checks with his co-pilot. 6 more souls who trusted the system, trusted inspections, trusted that the people who cleared aircraft knew what they were doing. Victoria saw Marcus and her expression softened fractionally, the closest thing to warmth he'd seen in 3 weeks. Mr. Tate, status? Marcus looked at his tablet, 81% failure probability glowing like an accusation. He looked at the G650, sleek and beautiful and deadly. He looked past Victoria to where Isaiah stood near the hangar entrance, watching with an expression that begged his father not to ruin this. 15 seconds of silence, the longest of Marcus Tate's life. His voice came out steady, professional, completely betraying every principle his grandfather and father had beaten into his bones. You're cleared for departure, Ms. Sterling. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Thank you, Marcus. I knew I could trust you. She walked toward the aircraft stairs, executives following. Captain Rodriguez gave Marcus a thumbs up. The ground crew started final preparations, fuel trucks pulling away, tow bars disconnecting. Marcus pulled out his tablet, signed the digital clearance form with hands that wanted to shake but didn't because muscle memory was stronger than conscience. Timestamp, 7:54 a.m., April 10th, 2024. Inspector, M. Tate. Status, cleared for flight. He watched the jet taxi toward the runway, twin BR 725 engines spooling up with that distinctive high-pitched whine that meant 30,000 pounds of thrust ready to punch through gravity. Beautiful sound, deadly sound. Isaiah stood 20 feet away now, relief obvious on his young face, and Marcus wanted to tell him he'd just bought his son's future with 8 people's lives. Wanted to explain that the thing Denise had tried to tell him, that being right didn't matter when you destroyed everything around you, had finally broken through his skull. But words felt pointless, so Marcus just stood there holding a tablet full of evidence that he'd known. He'd calculated, he'd seen the failure coming and chosen silence. The G650 turned onto runway 28, positioned for takeoff. Captain Rodriguez would be running final checks. Flight controls, engines, systems, everything would show green because green was the lie they'd all agreed to believe. Marcus's internal monologue whispered like his grandfather's ghost. You just murdered 8 people to save your son's job. How's that excellence working out? The jet began its takeoff roll. 40 knots, 60, 80. Marcus's hands tightened on the tablet. The screen still showed 81%, still showed the exponential curve, still showed math that didn't lie even when people did. 90 knots. V1 approaching. The decision speed where aborting became more dangerous than continuing, where commitment became mandatory. The starboard engine's pitch changed. Not much. Maybe half a tone. But Marcus had heard enough engines to know the difference between normal variance and wrong. 95 knots. The compressor stalled. Stage 3 blade failure, exactly as predicted, exactly as the math said it would, exactly as Marcus had known with 81% certainty would happen and had cleared anyway because keeping his son's respect felt more urgent than keeping strangers alive. The explosion was a physical thing, a bang that Marcus felt in his sternum. Black smoke erupted from the starboard nacelle, and the jet lurched right as asymmetric thrust tried to spin 70,000 pounds of aluminum into a fireball. Captain Rodriguez slammed the brakes. Marcus saw it in the way the nose dipped, the way rubber screamed against concrete, the way foam started spraying from fire trucks that shouldn't need to be there, wouldn't need to be there if Marcus Tate had chosen courage over comfort. The jet stopped 1,150 feet from the runway's end. Emergency slides deployed like yellow tongues, and 8 people Marcus had sentenced to death evacuated into California sunshine that felt obscene in its normalcy. Victoria Sterling stumbled out first, suit jacket torn at the shoulder, hair escaping its severe bun, face white but composed, always composed, even staring at death. She hit the ground, turned, and threw smoke and chaos and the scream of sirens. Her eyes found Marcus across 200 feet of tarmac. You cleared this aircraft. Marcus stood frozen, tablet in hand, evidence of his cowardice still glowing on the screen. Behind Victoria, Captain Rodriguez helped the others evacuate. Isaiah watched from the hangar entrance, his face draining of color as reality caught up to hope. Garrett Hollis appeared from the facility office, moving fast, tablet in his own hands. Victoria walked toward Marcus with the slow deliberation of a woman calculating exactly what flavor of destruction to deploy. 60 employees materialized from hangars and offices drawn by explosion and the particular gravity of catastrophe. When she stopped 3 feet away, her voice was ice over steel. I trusted you with my life, with 7 other lives. Marcus tried to speak, to explain, to defend. Nothing came. Garrett Hollis pushed forward, holding his tablet like a shield. Ms. Sterling! According to pre-flight logs, Marcus Tate signed final clearance at 00754 this morning. I have time-stamped documentation. Victoria's eyes never left Marcus. Explain. The crowd pressed closer, 60 witnesses to failure. Marcus saw Isaiah in his peripheral vision, his son's face twisted with something between horror and vindication, the look of someone watching their worst prediction come true. Marcus could have lied, could have blamed Hollis, blamed the manufacturer's specs, blamed the system that pressured mechanics into clearing marginal aircraft. 3 decades of being twice as good for half the credit had taught him exactly how to deflect responsibility, how to navigate institutional racism by never giving them ammunition. But his grandfather's voice cut through the noise. Trust the math, boy, and when you betray the math, own it. I knew the compressor was failing. The crowd went silent. Marcus continued, voice steady, because this was the only thing left he could control. I calculated 81% probability of catastrophic failure. I showed Mr. Hollis the data. He told me the numbers were within spec. Hollis's face went red. Tate cleared the aircraft. I have his signature. And I signed it. Marcus looked at Victoria. I knew it was unsafe. I cleared it anyway. Why? Her voice was barely above a whisper. This was the moment. The choice between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truth, between protecting himself and protecting whatever shred of integrity he had left. Because Mr. Hollis told me grounding your aircraft would kill the Apex acquisition. Because my son works here, and I chose keeping his job over keeping you alive. The confession landed like a blade. Someone in the crowd gasped. Isaiah made a sound Marcus couldn't interpret. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition of a pattern she'd seen before in different faces. You chose a paycheck over 8 lives. Yes, ma'am, I did. And I've spent 28 years building planes that fly safely, and it took one moment of cowardice to nearly kill 8 people. That's on me. All of it. Gerald Morrison, the operations director, pushed through the crowd. 58, gray suit, perpetually worried face. What the hell happened? Hollis thrust his tablet forward. Tate cleared an unsafe aircraft. I have documentation showing his negligence. Show me your inspection logs for the past 14 months. Marcus interrupted. Show everyone how you cleared that compressor 4 times with marginal readings. Always barely within spec, never flagging for deeper investigation. Hollis went pale. Morrison grabbed Hollis's tablet, started scrolling, his face darkening with each screen. Jesus Christ, Garrett, you've been clearing to minimum tolerance for... He looked up. 14 months of marginal inspections? Everything was within manufacturer's spec. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened the photos he'd taken at 7:18 a.m. Here's my documentation. Time-stamped diagnostic showing vibration amplitude, blade wear progression calculated from Garrett's own logs, exponential degradation curve, thermal expansion coefficients. I knew this engine would fail. I documented it, and then I cleared it anyway because I was afraid. He handed the phone to Morrison, then looked at the crowd. 60 faces, some sympathetic, most judging, all watching the public destruction of Marcus Tate. I spent 28 years being excellent at my job. Today I was a coward, that's the truth. Fire me, prosecute me, blacklist me, I earned all of it. But make sure you fire Garrett too, because his negligence made this possible. Morrison was scrolling through Marcus's photos, his jaw tight. He looked at Hollis. Your inspection authority is suspended pending investigation. Security will escort you to Morrison's office. Hollis started to protest, but 2 security guards were already there, and his face collapsed into the particular terror of a man watching his career end in real time. Marcus Tate, Morrison continued, you're terminated effective immediately. Marcus nodded. Expected. Deserved. Then a voice cut through the murmurs, cold and precise. Not yet. Victoria Sterling stepped forward. Before anyone leaves, before anyone destroys evidence or coordinates stories, I want answers. She looked at Marcus. You said you calculated 81% failure probability based on what methodology? This was the test. Marcus could hedge, could claim the math was theoretical, could protect himself with uncertainty. But he'd already chosen truth over comfort. Exponential blade degradation in titanium, aluminum, vanadium alloy under cyclic thermal stress. The blade wear 14 months ago was 0.43 millimeters, 86% of tolerance. Degradation follows a power curve, exponent approximately 2.3. Projected current wear, 0.47 millimeters. Add thermal expansion at cruise altitude given today's temperature differential, 16 degrees Fahrenheit, and you exceed structural tolerance during climb-out. Most likely failure point, 28,000 to 32,000 feet, exactly where it failed today. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Where did you learn that analysis? Purdue, aerospace engineering, MIT methodology from continuing education, but mostly from my grandfather who taught me physics doesn't care about paperwork. A black Lincoln Continental pulled into the facility and Marcus's stomach dropped because he recognized that car. had ridden in it 26 years ago when he was fresh out of Purdue and Colonel Donovan Pierce had been teaching aerospace certification courses. The car stopped and Colonel Pierce stepped out, 71 now, gray hair, cropped military short, dark suit, the kind of presence that made rooms quiet down. He'd been Marcus's instructor in 1998, the man who'd taught him that following procedures wasn't the same as understanding principles. Pierce surveyed the smoking jet, the crowd, the chaos. Then his eyes found Marcus. "Marcus Tate, it's been a long time." Marcus straightened despite everything. "Colonel Pierce, sir." Pierce walked closer, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who controlled time instead of being controlled by it. "I'm here for Apex's quarterly FAA audit. Seems I arrived at an interesting moment." Morrison stepped forward, nervous. "Colonel, this is an internal matter. Nothing involving catastrophic engine failure on a certified aircraft is internal, Mr. Morrison." Pierce's voice had the weight of regulatory authority behind it. "Nobody leaves. Nobody touches that aircraft. I'm conducting the investigation." He looked at Marcus. "Walk me through what you found." Colonel Donovan Pierce stood in the center of controlled chaos, and the 60 witnesses who'd been murmuring fell silent. He had that effect, the particular gravity of men who'd spent 40 years making life-or-death decisions in cockpits and accident investigations, who'd signed reports that ended careers and changed regulations. Marcus felt the weight of Pierce's attention like a physical thing. "Show me your documentation." Marcus handed over his tablet, the screen still displaying the calculations he'd run at 7:18 a.m. Pierce studied it without speaking, his face revealing nothing while fire trucks continued spraying suppression foam on the G650's ruined engine. 60 seconds passed. 90. The silence stretched until Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Pierce zoomed in on the exponential degradation curve, cross-referenced the maintenance logs, traced the thermal expansion calculations with one finger. His eyes flicked to Marcus once, sharp and evaluating, then back to the data. "You projected current blade wear at 0.47 millimeters based on 14-month-old measurement of 0.43. "Yes, sir. Using exponential degradation coefficient for titanium alloy under cyclic thermal stress. And your failure probability calculation? 81% based on thermal expansion at cruise altitude combined with existing wear exceeding structural tolerance during climb configuration." Pierce pulled out his own tablet, opened what looked like FAA investigation software, input Marcus's numbers. He ran the simulation while everyone waited, while Victoria Sterling stood with her arms crossed and suit jacket torn, while Isaiah watched from the hangar entrance with an expression Marcus couldn't read. The simulation finished. Pierce looked up. "Your methodology is graduate-level materials science. Most mechanics wouldn't catch the correlation between temperature differential and expansion coefficients." He turned to Gerald Morrison. "I need this facility's complete maintenance records for every aircraft Mr. Hollis has cleared in the past 18 months. Now." Morrison's face went pale. "Colonel, I can assure you, you can assure me of nothing until I see documentation. This isn't a request." Morrison pulled out his phone, barked orders to someone in the office. Pierce walked to the damaged G650, examined the smoking engine from a safe distance, then returned to where Marcus stood. "You signed the clearance despite knowing the risk." Not a question. An accusation delivered with the flat neutrality that made it worse than shouting. "Yes, sir." "Why?" Marcus felt 60 pairs of eyes on him, felt Isaiah's presence like a weight against his ribs, felt the familiar choice between comfortable lies and brutal honesty. "Mr. Hollis told me grounding the aircraft would kill a business acquisition. That 127 jobs, including my son's, depended on 0 delays. I chose my son's employment over 8 people's lives." Pierce's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition of a pattern he'd seen before. "And Mr. Hollis's inspection pattern over the past 14 months? Systematic negligence. He cleared marginal readings consistently, never flagged for deeper investigation, always chose minimum tolerance over proactive maintenance. Garrett Hollis, still flanked by security guards, found his voice. That's slander. I followed manufacturer specifications exactly. Pierce cut him off with a look. Specifications are minimums, Mr. Hollis. Professional judgment exists for exactly this situation. He turned to Morrison. Where are those records? An assistant appeared with a tablet, handed it to Pierce. He scrolled through inspection logs while the crowd waited, while smoke from the ruined engine drifted across the tarmac in the morning breeze. Marcus watched Pierce's jaw tighten incrementally with each screen. Mr. Hollis cleared 53 inspections in the past 18 months. 41 showed marginal readings within tolerance but requiring follow-up. Pierce looked up. How many did you flag for deeper investigation? Hollis shifted. The numbers were all within spec. Answer the question. None, because they were within manufacturer recommendations. Pierce's voice went cold. You consistently cleared aircraft to minimum specifications, never recommended proactive maintenance, never exercised professional judgment beyond checklist compliance. He pulled up 4 specific aircraft registrations. These jets show degradation patterns similar to Ms. Sterling's. Ground them immediately pending full turbine inspections. Morrison looked sick. Colonel, those are major clients. If we ground 4 aircraft simultaneously, then your clients will wait on the ground instead of dying at altitude. Your choice. The authority in Pierce's voice left no room for negotiation. Morrison pulled out his phone, started making calls, his face gray. Marcus heard fragments. Apologies to billionaires whose schedules had just been destroyed, explanations about FAA intervention, promises of expedited inspections that everyone knew would take days. Victoria Sterling stepped forward, her composure intact, despite the disaster smoking 50 yards away. Colonel Pierce, I'd like to hear Mr. Tate's complete analysis. Pierce nodded once. Mr. Tate, walk us through your diagnostic process. Marcus pulled up the first photo on his tablet, the diagnostic screen from 7:05 a.m. showing N1 compressor readings. His voice steadied as he shifted into the technical precision that had defined 3 decades of work. Vibration amplitude measured 0.00298 millimeters, within the 0.005 tolerance, but I cross-referenced with maintenance history. He swiped to show the log. 14 months ago, blade wear was 0.43 millimeters, 86% of the 0.5 limit. 9 months ago, efficiency test showed marginal performance. 4 months ago, vibration noted at 0.0027. Every inspection barely cleared minimums. He pulled up his handwritten calculations. Turbofan blade degradation isn't linear. It's exponential, especially in titanium alloy under thermal stress. At 0.43 14 months ago, microfractures were already propagating. Following the standard power curve with exponent 2.3, current wear should be approximately 0.47 millimeters, 94% of tolerance. Victoria leaned closer, studying the numbers with the focus of someone who'd built billions by understanding data. But that's still within the 0.5 limit. On the ground, yes. At cruise altitude, no. Marcus pulled up thermal expansion coefficients. This morning's temperature was 52 Fahrenheit. Forecast at flight level 450 was 68. That 16-degree differential causes expansion in the titanium alloy. Approximately 0.018 millimeters of effective clearance loss. Total effective clearance under operational stress 0.488 millimeters, 97.6% of maximum tolerance. Pierce was nodding, his expression shifting towards something that might have been respect. And your probability calculation? Marcus switched to his failure model. Given the stress curve, the flight profile over mountains, the thermal expansion, and the existing microfractures visible in the degradation pattern, catastrophic failure probability was 81%, most likely point. 28,000 to 32,000 feet during transition to cruise climb power. Where did it actually fail? 95 knots on takeoff roll, approximately 8,000 feet from the threshold. Marcus met Pierce's eyes. I was wrong about altitude. The blade failed earlier because ground-level ambient temperature was higher than I calculated, which accelerated thermal expansion during engine spool-up. The admission of error, even minor error in timing rather than outcome, felt like peeling off skin, but Pierce's expression softened fractionally. You were off by 3 minutes and 7,000 feet. The fundamental analysis was forensically accurate. He looked at Victoria. Ms. Sterling, Mr. Tate didn't just identify a problem. He predicted the specific failure mode with precision I've rarely seen outside NTSB investigation teams. Victoria's blue eyes remained on Marcus, calculating something he couldn't read. Then why did he clear my aircraft? Fear. Marcus didn't wait for Pierce to ask. Fear of losing my job, fear of my son losing his, fear of being right and alone versus wrong and employed. I let economics override physics, and 8 people nearly died because of it. The crowd murmured. Isaiah took a step forward, his face twisted with something between shame and anger, then stopped. Marcus wanted to look at his son to see if understanding had replaced the earlier fury, but couldn't turn away from Victoria's gaze. Pierce pulled up something on his tablet, then held it so the crowd could see. This is a simulation of what Mr. Tate prevented. He input the G6500's parameters, weight, altitude profile, the specific compressor failure mode based on visual damage. The animation showed the flight path Victoria's jet would have taken over the next 37 minutes. Climb to cruise altitude over the Rocky Mountains, Mach 0.9 at flight level 450, 280 miles from the nearest suitable airport. Then the engine failure at 30,000 feet, not a clean shutdown but catastrophic disintegration, titanium blades fragmenting into shrapnel. The simulation showed the cascade, engine debris severing hydraulic lines, fuel lines, control cables, asymmetric thrusts spinning the aircraft into uncontrollable yaw, emergency descent through mountain terrain with degraded flight controls, the spiral tightening, altitude bleeding away, options collapsing into inevitability. Pierce's voice cut through the simulation's silence. 43 documented cases of high-altitude compressor disintegration in twin-engine jets. 5 survivors total. Survival rate, 11.6%. He looked at Captain Rodriguez, who'd been standing quietly near the emergency vehicles. Captain, in your professional opinion, could you have recovered from this failure profile? Rodriguez's voice was steady but quiet. No, sir, not with that damage pattern at cruise altitude over mountains. Pierce turned to Victoria. Mr. Tate's analysis didn't just identify an engine fault. It prevented a mass casualty incident that would have killed everyone aboard and likely started a wildfire in terrain where rescue response time is measured in hours. The words landed like stones in water, ripples spreading through the crowd. Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Vindication that tasted like ash because he'd still cleared the aircraft, still chosen wrong, still earned every consequence coming. Victoria's face had gone paler, but her voice remained controlled. So Marcus identified a life-threatening defect, calculated the exact failure mode, and then cleared the aircraft anyway because he was threatened with job loss. Not threatened, Marcus corrected. Given a choice. Hollis made clear the economic stakes. I made the coward's calculation. And I, Victoria said slowly, created the pressure that made that calculation necessary. The admission surprised Marcus. He'd expected fury, legal threats, the kind of billionaire rage that ended careers and reputations. Instead, Victoria looked at Gerald Morrison. You told me this facility operated to the highest safety standards. Morrison stammered. Ms. Sterling, we follow all FAA regulations. Following minimums isn't the same as maintaining standards. Her voice had the particular edge of someone used to cutting through institutional nonsense. "Colonel Pierce, what happens next?" Pierce closed his tablet with deliberate finality. "I'm issuing immediate ground orders for the 4 aircraft Mr. Hollis cleared with marginal readings. Apex Aviation will undergo full regulatory review. Mr. Hollis's inspection authority is suspended pending FAA hearing." He looked at Garrett Hollis. "You'll be notified of the hearing date. I recommend you retain legal counsel." Hollis's face cycled through red to white to gray, the color of a man watching 3 decades of work collapse. Security escorted him toward the facility office. His shoulders slumped. His protest died in his throat. Pierce turned to Marcus. "Your inspection methodology should be taught in certification programs. Your decision to clear the aircraft despite your analysis should be studied as a case in systemic pressure overriding professional judgment." He extended his hand. "Outstanding diagnostic work, Mr. Tate. Catastrophic moral failure. Both things are true." They shook hands, and Marcus felt the weight of Pierce's assessment, accurate, fair, unforgiving. Someone in the crowd started clapping. A younger mechanic Marcus vaguely recognized from late shifts. Then another joined, then more. Not everyone, at least 20 people stood silent, judging or uncomfortable or simply confused. But enough applauded that Marcus felt the recognition of his technical expertise even as his character burned. Victoria watched the applause with an expression Marcus couldn't read. Then she walked toward him with the slow deliberation of someone who'd made a decision but hadn't yet revealed it. She stopped 3 feet away. "Mr. Tate, you told me when we made our arrangement that if you said an aircraft was unsafe, I wouldn't fly. No negotiation, no second opinions." "Yes, ma'am. But you didn't say it was unsafe. You cleared it." Marcus had no defense. "I betrayed the terms of our agreement and your trust. I'm sorry isn't sufficient, but it's all I have." Victoria studied him for a long moment, then looked at Morrison. "I'm not purchasing Apex Aviation. This facility has a safety culture problem that starts at the top and runs through every level." She turned back to Marcus. "But I am starting my own aviation safety company. I need a director of engineering, someone who knows what matters, someone who failed catastrophically once and won't fail again." The offer hit Marcus like turbulence. "Ms. Sterling, I just nearly killed me because you were afraid. I understand fear, Mr. Tate. I've made decisions based on fear that cost people their jobs, their dignity, their futures. The difference between us is you're admitting it in front of 60 witnesses." Her voice softened fractionally. "I need someone who won't yes me to death. Someone who'll ground my jet even if it costs millions. Are you that person now? Or were you only that person before the consequences became real?" Marcus felt the question's weight, felt Isaiah watching from the hangar entrance, felt the crowd's attention pressing against his skin. This was the second test, the choice between redemption and resignation, between believing he could be better or accepting that cowardice was his final definition. "I can be that person, ma'am, but I need conditions." Victoria's eyebrow lifted. "You're negotiating from a position of having just been fired, which means I have nothing left to lose except integrity I've already compromised once." Marcus's voice steadied. "Full veto authority on any aircraft, no override possible. My son gets hired as junior engineer, chance to prove himself separate from me. Anonymous safety reporting system, 0 retaliation policy, profit sharing for anyone who catches faults, incentivize honesty over efficiency, and you and I meet weekly, no assistance, where you tell me one hard truth about your business I might not want to hear." Victoria's lips curved, not quite a smile. "That last one isn't about aviation safety. You said you're surrounded by people who won't tell you no. That includes telling you when your decisions create pressure that compromises safety. Someone has to be brave enough to call that out. And you think you're qualified after today's performance?" The challenge was fair. Marcus met her eyes. I think I'm the only person you've met who admitted cowardice in front of witnesses instead of making excuses. That's not courage, but it's honesty. And honesty's rarer than competence. Victoria extended her hand. Deal. Salary 165,000, 2% equity, full veto authority. Sterling Aerospace Safety launches in 30 days. You have until then to decide if you're actually ready to stand in your principles when it costs you something. They shook, and Marcus felt doors opening and closing simultaneously, futures bifurcating into versions of himself he'd either become or fail to reach. Morrison stepped forward, desperation obvious. Ms. Sterling, if you reconsider the acquisition, we can implement new protocols. You can't fix a culture that prioritizes deals over lives, Mr. Morrison. This facility will continue operating, probably profitably, until the next catastrophic failure. I won't be part of that. She looked at the assembled employees. Anyone interested in working for a company where safety actually matters more than quarterly earnings? Sterling Aerospace will be hiring in 2 weeks. Bring your integrity and your expertise. Leave your tolerance for cutting corners. She walked toward the black Mercedes that had materialized near the facility entrance, her torn jacket and disheveled hair somehow making her more formidable rather than diminished. Marcus watched her go, trying to process that he'd gone from fired to offered a director position in the span of 12 minutes. Pierce approached him again, voice lower. Marcus, walk with me. They moved away from the crowd, toward the damaged G650 where foam crews were finishing containment. Pierce stopped near the starboard engine, studied the smoke-blackened nacelle. Why did you really become an engineer? The question felt like a non sequitur until Marcus understood it wasn't. My grandfather was a mechanic for Tuskegee Airmen. He taught me physics defeats prejudice, that a black man with knowledge could earn trust from people who'd never invite him to dinner. And what did you learn today? Marcus looked at the ruined engine, at the emergency slide still deployed, at the scorch marks on concrete where titanium had burned. That I forgot why I started. Somewhere between Boeing and divorce and unemployment, I forgot that physics matters more than economics. That 8 lives aren't worth any paycheck. Pierce nodded slowly. You know what separates good engineers from great ones? What? Good engineers follow rules. Great engineers know when rules aren't enough to keep people alive. Pierce's voice carried the weight of 40 years watching people make this exact mistake. You followed the rules. Hollis's clearance was technically defensible. The numbers were within spec. You followed them right into catastrophe. The words cut deeper than shouting would have. Marcus had spent 3 decades believing excellence was about precision, about knowing more and calculating better, about being technically correct. He'd never considered that excellence sometimes meant being technically wrong in service of a larger truth. The FAA needs expert witnesses on systemic safety failures, Pierce continued. Testify about Apex's culture, about the pressure to prioritize deals over inspections, about how good people make terrible choices when the system incentivizes cowardice. Help us build reforms so the next Marcus Tate doesn't face your choice. That means ending careers, Isaiah's included if this facility closes, or saving future lives. Your son's 24, he'll find another job. The people who would have died if this pattern continued won't get another life. Pierce's eyes were steady. Choose, Marcus. Choose right this time. The weight of it settled in Marcus's chest. Testifying meant exposing Apex's practices, meant regulatory intervention that could shut down the facility, meant unemployment for people who'd done nothing wrong except work in a system designed to make wrong choices easier than right ones. But it also meant preventing the next near miss, the next catastrophic failure, the next family notified that their loved one died because someone chose profit over physics. I'll testify, whatever it costs. Pierce extended his hand again, and this time the handshake felt different. Not absolution, but recognition that redemption required action, not just admission. Good. I'll be in touch within a week to schedule your deposition. He started walking back toward his Lincoln, then paused. Marcus, the fact you're questioning the consequences tells me you've learned something. Don't lose that. Pierce drove away, and Marcus stood alone near the smoking jet, processing the past hour, fired, offered a better job, committed to testimony that would destroy the facility where his son worked. The trajectory of his life had bent so sharply he couldn't see where it led. Dad, Isaiah's voice cut through the post-crisis quiet. Marcus turned, found his son standing 10 feet away, face unreadable. They hadn't been this close, this alone in 4 months. Isaiah. His son stepped closer, and Marcus saw the conflict written in every line of his young face, anger and shame and confusion fighting for dominance. You were right about the engine, and wrong about clearing it. Isaiah flinched. I pushed you to sign off. I told you not to ground the jet, that you'd ruin my career. His voice cracked. 8 people almost died because I was more worried about my job than their lives. Marcus wanted to absolve him, to take full responsibility, to protect his son from the weight of complicity. But protection was what had broken their relationship in the first place. Marcus always fixing, always correcting, never letting Isaiah carry his own consequences. You were 24 and scared. I was 52 and should have known better. We both chose wrong, son. Now we both have to choose better. Isaiah's eyes were wet. I wanted you to fail. Just once I wanted you to be wrong so I could stop feeling like nothing I do measures up. His laugh was bitter. And when you actually failed, when you made the human choice instead of the perfect one, I realized I didn't want that at all. I wanted you to be right, even if it cost me everything. The confession broke something in Marcus's chest, the wall he'd built between competence and connection. He'd spent 24 years teaching his son physics and precision, never teaching him it was okay to be afraid, okay to fail, okay to be human instead of perfect. I taught you to be right, Marcus heard himself say. Forgot to teach you it's okay to be scared, okay to admit when you don't know something. I made excellence feel like the only option, so failure felt like the end of the world. It wasn't just you, Dad. I resented you for being good at everything, for always having the answer, for making it look easy when it was so hard for me. Isaiah wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. When you got laid off, part of me was relieved. Finally, you weren't perfect. Finally, you'd understand what it felt like to not measure up. The honesty was brutal and necessary. Marcus had suspected Isaiah's resentment but never confronted it, never asked what his constant corrections had cost his son's confidence. I'm not perfect, Isaiah. I'm a man who loved planes more than his wife, who let pride destroy his marriage, who nearly killed 8 people because he couldn't stand being unemployed at 52. Marcus's voice roughened. And I'm sorry I made you feel like anything less than excellent was failure. You're 24. You're supposed to make mistakes, supposed to figure things out, supposed to be allowed to not know everything. Isaiah looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of understanding that healing required more than apologies. Sterling's hiring? She offered me director of engineering. I negotiated junior engineer position for you, separate from my supervision so you can build your own reputation. Dad, you don't have to. I want to. Not to fix things for you, but to give you a chance to prove yourself without my shadow hanging over every decision. Marcus paused. But I'm also testifying for the FAA, about Apex's culture, Hollis's negligence, the pressure to clear marginal aircraft. That testimony might shut this place down. Isaiah absorbed that. So everyone here loses their jobs because we made one mistake. No. Everyone here loses their jobs because Apex built a system that makes my mistake inevitable. Hollis cleared 53 marginal inspections, Isaiah. How many other mechanics are doing the same thing at other facilities? How many near misses are we not hearing about because the blade fails at altitude instead of on the ground? His son's face hardened with realization. This isn't about punishment, it's about preventing the next one. Exactly. And it's going to cost people I like, people who have families and mortgages and didn't do anything wrong except work in a broken system. But if I don't testify, if I protect the system because consequences are uncomfortable, then I learned nothing from today. Isaiah nodded slowly. Then I'll testify too, about the pressure I felt, the choice you faced, how the acquisition deadline made safety secondary to economics. His voice steadied. We both failed. We both fix it. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, the beginning of a partnership instead of a hierarchy, respect instead of resentment. You sure this won't make you popular? I'm 24 and unemployed in 30 days when this place closes. Popular doesn't matter, doing right matters. Isaiah's smile was fragile but real. You taught me that, even if I forgot it for a while. They stood in silence, watching foam crews finish cleanup, watching the sun climb higher over the Bay Area, watching the ordinary world continue despite the extraordinary thing that had almost happened. Dad, when we work at Sterling, can we just work together? Not you teaching me, not me resenting you, just two engineers doing the job. I'd like that, son. I'd like that a lot. Isaiah extended his hand, and they shook. Formal, awkward, the first step towards something neither of them knew how to name yet. A taxi pulled up near the facility entrance, and Victoria Sterling stepped out, having changed into a fresh suit somewhere in the past 30 minutes. She saw Marcus and Isaiah, walked over with her phone already in hand. Mr. Tate, I'm holding a press conference in 2 hours. Aviation industry journalists, FAA representatives, investors, I'm announcing Sterling Aerospace Safety and our zero-tolerance policy for marginal clearances. She looked between Marcus and Isaiah. I'd like you both there. Marcus to explain the technical methodology that prevented catastrophic failure, Isaiah to speak about the systemic pressures facing junior mechanics. Isaiah glanced at Marcus, uncertainty obvious. Ms. Sterling, I'm not sure I'm qualified. You're a 24-year-old engineer who experienced firsthand how economic pressure overrides safety culture. That perspective matters. Her voice softened fractionally. I'm not asking you to condemn Apex. I'm asking you to tell the truth about what it feels like to be caught between doing right and keeping your job. Marcus watched his son process the request, saw the fear and the courage fighting for space. Finally, Isaiah nodded. I'll do it. Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned. Colonel Pierce just released a preliminary statement. He's citing this incident as evidence of industry-wide negligence culture. We're about to be the center of a regulatory firestorm. Good, Marcus heard himself say. Maybe it'll force changes that should have happened decades ago. Victoria's smile was sharp. I hired you for honesty, Mr. Tate, but be prepared for honesty to be expensive. Every facility that cuts corners is about to see us as existential threats. We'll be underbid on every contract, attacked in trade publications, accused of over-engineering at customer expense. But we'll keep people alive. Yes, we will. She looked at the smoking G650, her expression hardening. That aircraft cost $65 million. I'll scrap it rather than repair it. Let it stand as a reminder that no amount of money is worth compromising safety. Marcus thought about the economic implications. Millions in write-offs, insurance battles, reputation damage for the G650 model line. Victoria was choosing principle over profit in ways that would cost her personally. That's going to hurt your bottom line. I have $4 billion, Mr. Tate. I can afford principles. Her eyes met his. The question is whether you can, because this company won't make you rich or popular. It'll make you right. And being right in an industry built on comfortable lies comes with a price. The challenge was clear, the stakes explicit. Marcus had spent 3 decades chasing excellence defined by technical precision and career advancement. Now Victoria was offering a different kind of excellence, the kind that prioritized lives over livelihoods, truth over tolerance, courage over comfort. I'm in, whatever it costs. Good. Press conference is at noon. Conference room at the Marriott in San Francisco. Dress professional, speak plain. Don't apologize for being right. She walked toward the taxi, then paused. Marcus, what you did today was unforgivable. But what you do next, that's who you actually are. Don't waste the opportunity. The taxi pulled away, and Marcus stood with Isaiah in the morning sunlight that felt too bright for catastrophe, too ordinary for the magnitude of change crystallizing around them. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. This is Denise. Isaiah called me. Are you okay? Marcus stared at his ex-wife's name on the screen, at the question that implied concern instead of the exhaustion that had defined their last years together. He typed, not okay, but maybe becoming someone who could be. Her response came quickly. Good, that's a start. Another text arrived, this one from Colonel Pierce. FAA deposition scheduled April 24th, 9 a.m., San Francisco field office. Bring all documentation. This goes beyond Apex. We're building a case for industry-wide reform. Marcus showed the message to Isaiah. 2 weeks to prepare testimony that'll make us pariahs in private aviation. Or heroes to the passengers who don't die because we changed the system. Isaiah's voice carried a conviction Marcus hadn't heard before. Dad, I've been angry at you for 2 years. Angry about the divorce, angry about your perfectionism, angry that you made excellence look easy when I was struggling. But today I learned being excellent doesn't mean being perfect. It means being brave enough to fail publicly and honest enough to own it. The words settled in Marcus's chest like stones finding their resting place. He'd spent 52 years believing excellence was about never failing, about always having the answer, about being so competent that nobody could question his worth. He'd measured success by titles and salaries and the respect of colleagues who valued technical precision above human connection. Today he'd learned excellence was simpler and harder, choosing truth when lies were easier, choosing lives when economics were safer, choosing courage when fear whispered seductive justifications. Isaiah, I don't know how to be your father without trying to fix everything. I don't know how to love you without teaching you, how to support you without correcting you. Then maybe we figure it out together, 2 engineers building something new. Isaiah's smile was tentative but genuine. I'm scared, Dad. Scared of testifying, scared of unemployment, scared I'll fail at Sterling like I feel like I'm failing at everything. The admission of fear, raw, undefended, was the most adult thing Marcus had heard from his son. He wanted to reassure, to promise it would be fine, to fix the fear with certainty. Instead, he told the truth. I'm terrified. Terrified I'll make the coward's choice again. Terrified Victoria's offer is charity I don't deserve. Terrified I'll destroy your career before it starts. But fear is just data, son. It tells us what matters, and you matter more than my comfort. They stood together in the wreckage of what had been, watching the beginning of what might be. 2 men who'd failed spectacularly and chosen to fail forward instead of backward. The press conference was in 90 minutes. Marcus had no speech prepared, no talking points, no polished narrative to soften the brutal truth of his cowardice and Victoria's near death. But he had documentation, calculations, and the willingness to stand in front of cameras and admit that excellence sometimes looked like catastrophic failure followed by painful honesty. That would have to be enough. Because the alternative, silence, comfort, the easy path of letting someone else tell the story, was the choice he'd made at 7:54 a.m. when he signed the clearance. Marcus Tate was done making that choice. The Marriott conference room held 47 journalists, 12 aviation industry analysts, 3 FAA officials, and enough skepticism to ground every aircraft in North America. Marcus stood at the podium beside Victoria Sterling, his hands steady on note cards he wouldn't need because the numbers were burned into memory. Isaiah sat in the front row, 24 years old and pale under the LED lights, ready to tell strangers how he'd pressured his father into nearly killing 8 people. Victoria spoke first, her voice carrying the particular authority of someone announcing she was about to spend millions proving a point. At 7:57 this morning, my Gulfstream G650 suffered catastrophic compressor failure during takeoff. 8 souls aboard survived because the failure occurred on the ground instead of at cruise altitude over the Rocky Mountains. She paused, let the implication sink in. The engine didn't fail randomly. It failed exactly as predicted by Marcus Tate, an aerospace engineer who identified the defect, calculated the failure probability at 81%, and was pressured to clear the aircraft anyway. Murmurs rippled through the journalists. Cameras focused tighter. Sterling Aerospace Safety launches today with one principle. We will never clear an aircraft we wouldn't fly ourselves. We will never prioritize schedules over lives. And we will never tolerate a culture where competence is punished and compliance is rewarded. Victoria looked at Marcus. Mr. Tate will explain the technical analysis. Then we'll take questions. Marcus stepped to the microphone, acutely aware that this moment would define the rest of his career. Either as the engineer who prevented catastrophe or the coward who nearly caused one. Both narratives were true. The question was which one he'd let speak louder. At 7:05 this morning, I measured vibration amplitude in the starboard engine's N1 compressor at 0.00298 millimeters. Within manufacturer tolerance of 0.005. He pulled up the diagnostic screen on the display behind him. But I also reviewed maintenance history showing progressive degradation over 14 months. Blade wear at 86% of tolerance, trending toward failure following exponential curves I'd studied at Purdue and applied at Boeing for 12 years. A journalist raised her hand, Angela Reeves from Aviation Week, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses. Mr. Tate, if the readings were within tolerance, why flag it as unsafe? Because tolerance is a minimum, not a target. It's the line where manufacturers feel comfortable saying statistically most aircraft will survive, but most isn't good enough when you're betting 8 lives. Marcus advanced the slide, showing his thermal expansion calculations. At cruise altitude, temperature differential would add 0.018 millimeters of effective wear. Combined with existing degradation, that puts the blade at 97.6% of structural limit during the highest stress phase of flight. Another journalist, Marcus didn't catch the outlet, interrupted. So you're saying manufacturer specs are inadequate? I'm saying they're minimums designed for average conditions. They don't account for cumulative stress, thermal cycles, or the exponential nature of microfracture propagation in titanium alloys. Marcus felt his voice steadying, the technical precision grounding him. Physics doesn't care about paperwork. Metal fatigues whether we document it or not. Angela Reeves again. Then why did you clear the aircraft? The question Marcus had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. He could hedge, could blame systemic pressure, could make himself sympathetic instead of culpable. But Victoria's challenge echoed in his head. What you do next, that's who you actually are. Because I was told grounding the aircraft would kill a business acquisition. That 127 jobs depended on 0 delays. Because my son works at the facility and I chose protecting his employment over protecting 8 lives. The admission landed like concrete. I was a coward. I had the analysis, the evidence, the expertise to prevent catastrophic failure, and I signed the clearance anyway because losing my job felt scarier than gambling with people I'd never meet. The room went silent. Cameras clicked. Marcus saw one journalist's eyes widen. This wasn't the defensive spin they'd expected. The compressor failed at 95 knots during takeoff roll. Had it failed at cruise altitude as my calculations predicted, Survival probability was 11.6% based on 43 historical cases. 8 people would likely be dead because I valued comfort over courage. Victoria stepped beside him, her presence a statement. Mr. Tate's failure is exactly why Sterling Aerospace exists. Not to punish honesty, but to eliminate the pressures that make dishonesty rational. She looked at the FAA officials. We've submitted full documentation to Colonel Donovan Pierce's investigation team. We're recommending industry-wide reforms, mandatory predictive maintenance protocols, anonymous safety reporting with whistleblower protection, profit sharing for mechanics who catch marginal conditions before they become catastrophic. One of the FAA officials, Robert Chen, regional director, stood. Ms. Sterling, you're describing regulatory changes that would increase maintenance costs by 30 to 40% industry-wide. Smaller operators will argue they can't afford it. Then smaller operators can't afford to fly. Victoria's voice had edges. Aviation safety isn't negotiable based on budget constraints. Either commit to keeping people alive or don't operate aircraft. Chen's expression suggested he appreciated the principle but understood the political impossibility. The FAA will review your recommendations, but regulatory change takes years, not months. Then we start today. Victoria gestured to Marcus. Sterling Aerospace is implementing these protocols immediately. Any client uncomfortable with our standards is welcome to find cheaper alternatives. When those alternatives start falling from the sky, maybe the industry will reconsider what affordable actually means. The room erupted with questions, journalists shouting over each other. Victoria pointed to a man in the back, James Whitmore, Wall Street Journal. Ms. Sterling, you're essentially declaring war on the entire private aviation industry. How do you expect to survive when competitors can undercut you by 40%? By not killing our clients. Victoria smiled without warmth. Novel approach, I realize, but I suspect there's a market for people who'd prefer arriving alive over arriving cheaply. Marcus saw Isaiah shift in his seat, preparing. Victoria noticed too. We also have testimony from Isaiah Tate, junior engineer at the facility where this occurred. He'll speak about the pressures facing younger mechanics who see problems but lack the authority or job security to report them. Isaiah stood, walked to the podium, and Marcus felt parental terror mixed with pride. His son had never spoken publicly, had spent 24 years avoiding attention. Now he was about to confess complicity to 47 journalists. Isaiah's voice started shaky but firmed. I'm 24. I've been working in aviation maintenance for 7 months. This morning I pressured my father to clear an aircraft I knew was unsafe because I was more worried about losing my job than about 8 people dying. The brutal honesty silenced the room. My dad found the fault, showed me the calculations, explained why the jet would fail, and I told him if he grounded it, he'd ruin my career. I made his choice between my employment and their lives. Isaiah's hands gripped the podium. He chose wrong. But I created the pressure that made wrong feel rational. And if the system makes that pressure normal, if junior mechanics across the industry are facing the same choice every day, then we're not preventing accidents. We're just waiting for the next catastrophe. Angela Reeves leaned forward. What would have made you feel safe reporting the problem? Isaiah thought for a moment. Anonymous reporting that doesn't end careers. Profit sharing that rewards catching problems instead of punishing them. Leadership that treats safety flags as competence instead of cowardice. He looked at Victoria. Ms. Sterling's company is implementing all 3. That's the only reason I'd work in aviation again. The questions continued for 40 minutes. Marcus answered technical queries about degradation curves and thermal expansion coefficients. Victoria deflected accusations that she was using the incident for publicity. Isaiah explained the impossible choice between conscience and rent money with the clarity of someone who'd lived it 6 hours ago. Finally, Victoria called the conference. We've submitted full documentation to the FAA. Sterling Aerospace Safety begins operations in 30 days. We're hiring engineers and mechanics who prioritize physics over profit. Thank you. The journalists swarmed, but Victoria's security team created space for exit. Marcus followed her into the hallway, Isaiah beside him, and felt the magnitude of what they'd just done settle into his bones. They'd declared war on an industry built on minimum compliance, armed with nothing but honesty and Victoria's billions. In the Uber back to Oakland, Marcus's phone exploded with notifications. Texts from former Boeing colleagues, half supportive, half accusatory. Emails from aviation forums calling him a whistleblower hero or a grandstanding coward, depending on the sender's relationship to regulatory oversight. 3 voicemails from journalists wanting follow-up interviews. Isaiah stared at his own phone, face pale. I have 43 messages, most of them from Apex employees saying I got them fired. Marcus's chest tightened. You didn't fire them. The system that made their jobs dependent on unsafe practices fired them. Tell them that. Isaiah showed a text. Thanks for destroying 127 livelihoods to make yourself feel important, you entitled piece of shit. Victoria, sitting across from them in the car, took Isaiah's phone, read the message, handed it back. Block that number. Block anyone who confuses honesty with betrayal. You'll have hundreds more before this is over. How do you deal with it? Isaiah's voice was small. Everyone hating you for doing the right thing? I don't deal with it. I out-survive it. Victoria's expression softened fractionally. Isaiah, people comfortable with broken systems will always attack those who expose the breaking. They're not angry you told the truth. They're angry the truth makes their comfort untenable. Marcus watched his son absorb that, saw the young man struggling with consequences he hadn't anticipated. Isaiah, if this is too much, it's not too much, Dad. It's just harder than I expected. Isaiah looked at the messages accumulating. I thought telling the truth would feel righteous. Mostly it feels lonely. That's because it is lonely. Victoria's voice carried experience. Righteousness is a story we tell ourselves after courage. During courage, it's just fear and isolation and wondering if you made the right choice. The car pulled up to Marcus's apartment building. Isaiah lived 3 miles away in a studio similar to his father's. The Tate men apparently shared aesthetic sensibilities along with aerospace expertise. Victoria looked at them both. 30 days until we launch. Use the time to prepare for what comes next. The FAA investigation will be brutal. Competitors will attack our methodology, our motives, our credentials. Clients we thought were committed will find cheaper alternatives. She paused. And through all of it, we maintain standards. No compromises, no exceptions, no just this once because the pressure's intense. Understood? Marcus and Isaiah nodded. Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned. Colonel Pierce wants to meet tomorrow. Says he has preliminary findings from Apex's records. I'll forward you the details. She left them on the curb, black Mercedes pulling away into San Francisco traffic. Marcus and Isaiah stood in the late afternoon light. 2 men who'd confessed their failures to the world and now had to live with the consequences. Dad, can I come up? I don't want to be alone right now. The request surprised Marcus. 4 months of silence broken by vulnerability. Of course. The apartment looked smaller with 2 people, felt more obviously temporary. Isaiah sat on the futon while Marcus made coffee, and the domestic normalcy felt surreal after the morning's catastrophe. When you and Mom split, I blamed you. Isaiah accepted the mug, held it like an anchor. Blamed you for choosing work over family, for being so obsessed with perfection you forgot to be human. And I swore I'd never be like you. Marcus sat in the room's only chair, giving his son space. That's healthy, learning from your parents' mistakes. Except I became exactly like you, obsessed with proving myself, prioritizing career over relationships, measuring worth by competence instead of connection. Isaiah's laugh was hollow. I don't even have a girlfriend because I'm terrified of being vulnerable. I work 60-hour weeks not because I love aviation, but because I'm scared of being average. I'm 24 and I'm already becoming the thing I resented. The confession hit Marcus in places he'd protected with denial. He'd spent 2 years blaming Denise's departure on her inability to understand that providing required sacrifice, never considering that Isaiah might have watched the marriage collapse and learned all the wrong lessons. Your mother left because I confused excellence with obsession. Because I thought being competent at work excused being absent at home. Marcus's voice roughened. I thought if I was good enough at building planes, it would compensate for being mediocre at building a family. Turns out physics doesn't work that way. Do you regret it? The career, the choices, the thing that cost you Mom? Marcus considered lying, offering reassurance, protecting his son from uncomfortable truth. But they'd spent the morning telling brutal honesty to strangers. His son deserved the same. I regret not understanding there was a choice. I thought providing and loving were the same thing, that my obsession with precision proved I cared by keeping the world safe. He met Isaiah's eyes. What I actually proved was that I loved the clarity of engineering more than the complexity of human connection. And yes, I regret that every day. Isaiah absorbed that, processing. What would you do different? Come home at 6 instead of 8. Ask your mother about her day instead of talking about turbofan efficiency. Teach you it's okay to fail instead of making excellence the only acceptable outcome. Marcus paused. But mostly I'd learned that being right isn't the same as being good. I was right about a lot of things. Technical things, safety things, physics things. Being right didn't make me a good husband or a present father. Is that why you cleared the jet? Because you wanted to choose family over being right for once? The question cut to bone. Marcus had told himself he cleared the aircraft because of economic pressure, because of systemic coercion, because the choice between conscience and consequences was impossible. But Isaiah's question exposed a deeper truth. Maybe some part of me thought choosing your job over technical correctness would prove I'd learned that I could prioritize people over physics. Marcus felt the bitter irony. Instead, I proved I still don't understand the difference between loving people and protecting them from consequences they need to face. Isaiah set down his mug. I needed you to ground that jet, Dad, not because it was safe, but because it was right. I needed you to show me that doing the hard thing matters more than making things easy for me. I know that now, and I needed to face the consequences of pressuring you. Needed to own that I created the moral trap instead of blaming you for falling into it. Isaiah's voice steadied. We both failed. That's okay. We're both learning. That's what matters. They sat in silence while Oakland's evening sounds filtered through thin walls. The same sirens, the same bass, the same proof that the world continued despite personal catastrophe. Marcus felt something shift between them. Not reconciliation exactly, but the beginning of seeing each other as flawed humans instead of idealized roles. His phone buzzed. Email from Colonel Pierce. Tomorrow 9 a.m., my office. Bring Isaiah. Preliminary findings suggest Apex's negligence is worse than initial assessment. Marcus showed Isaiah the message. Ready to spend tomorrow explaining how we nearly killed 8 people? Ready to spend tomorrow preventing it from happening again. Isaiah stood, stretched. I should go. But Dad, can we do this? Weekly? Just talk, no lectures, no fixing, just 2 guys figuring things out? The offer felt fragile, precious. I'd like that. And Isaiah, I'm proud of you. For the press conference, for the honesty, for being braver at 24 than I was at 52. Isaiah's smile was tentative but genuine. You were brave today too, Dad. Just took you longer to get there. After his son left, Marcus sat in the quiet apartment and let himself feel the full weight of the day. Fired, offered redemption, confessed cowardice to the world, started rebuilding a relationship he'd thought was irreparable. The emotional whiplash was exhausting. His phone rang. Denise's number. Marcus answered. "Hello?" "Isaiah called me, told me about the press conference, the engine failure, everything." Her voice carried the particular tone of ex-wives who'd predicted disaster and found no satisfaction in being right. "Are you actually okay, Marcus, or are you pretending again?" The question assumed intimacy he'd thought was lost in divorce paperwork. "I'm not okay, but I'm being honest about not being okay, which feels like progress." "It is progress." Denise paused. "I watched the press conference online. You looked terrified." "I was terrified." "Good. You should be terrified when you nearly kill people." Her voice softened. "But you also looked like you were finally telling the truth instead of managing perceptions. That's new." Marcus felt tears threaten, pushed them down. "I spent 28 years thinking competence was enough, that if I was good enough at my job it would compensate for being absent from our marriage. I was wrong about that." "Yes, you were." No anger in her voice, just acknowledgement. "But Marcus, the reason I left wasn't because you loved planes. It was because you couldn't admit loving planes more than you loved me. You couldn't be honest about the choice you'd made." The words landed in places Marcus had protected with rationalization. He'd told himself Denise left because she didn't understand sacrifice, didn't appreciate that providing required absence. He'd never considered she left because he'd lied about what he was sacrificing and why. "I loved my work more than I loved you. That's the truth I couldn't admit until the work was gone and you were too." Marcus's voice cracked. "And I'm sorry. For the years I pretended differently, for making you feel secondary, for not having the courage to be honest about what I'd chosen." Silence on the line, broken by Denise's breath catching. "Thank you. I needed to hear that for 2 years. I needed 2 years to understand it was true. Isaiah says you're starting a new company with Victoria Sterling. Safety-focused, integrity-driven, all the things Apex wasn't." "Yes, and terrified I'll fail at it the same way I failed at Boeing, at Apex, at being your husband." "Then fail honestly instead of lying about why. That's the only difference that matters." Denise's voice carried something Marcus hadn't heard in years. Not love exactly, but respect. "Marcus, you're 52. You have time to become someone different. Don't waste it trying to be the person you were before everything broke." They talked for 20 more minutes about Isaiah, about the press conference, about the small details of lives that had diverged but still intersected through their son. When they hung up, Marcus felt lighter and heavier simultaneously, the burden of acknowledged failure mixed with the freedom of stopped pretending. At 11 p.m., unable to sleep, Marcus opened his laptop and started drafting the testimony he'd deliver to Pierce tomorrow. Not a defense, but an accounting. A forensic examination of every choice that had led from competent engineer to coward to whatever he was becoming. The words came slowly, painfully, with the precision he'd once reserved for technical specifications now applied to moral failure. By 2 a.m., he had 7 pages of brutal honesty about systemic pressure, personal fear, and the particular way excellence could become excuse for avoiding uncomfortable truths. He emailed it to Victoria with a note, "Draft testimony. Let me know if I should soften anything." Her reply came within minutes. "Don't soften a word. This is exactly the testimony we need." April 11th, 9 a.m. F. A. A regional office, San Francisco. Colonel Donovan Pierce's office overlooked the bay, floor-to-ceiling windows framing container ships and gray water. The man himself sat behind a government-issued desk covered in 3 tablets and approximately 40 years of accumulated aviation incident reports. Marcus and Isaiah sat across from him. Victoria beside them in a chair she'd pulled from the corner, her presence both support and witness. Pierce opened a folder thick enough to qualify as a weapon. I've reviewed Apex Aviation's maintenance records for the past 36 months. What I found makes this morning's engine failure look like the symptom, not the disease. He pulled up a spreadsheet on the display behind him. Rows and rows of aircraft registrations, inspection dates, findings, clearances. Red highlights marked marginal readings. There were hundreds. Garrett Hollis cleared 217 inspections in 36 months. 148 showed readings within tolerance but trending toward failure. He flagged 0 for proactive maintenance. Pierce's jaw tightened, but Hollis wasn't alone. 3 other senior mechanics at Apex followed the same pattern. Between them, they cleared 531 aircraft with marginal conditions over 3 years. Victoria leaned forward. How many of those aircraft are still flying? 412 are active. We're issuing emergency airworthiness directives for all of them. Mandatory inspections within 72 hours or grounding. Pierce looked at Marcus. Your analysis methodology is being applied to every aircraft Apex has touched since 2021. Preliminary results suggest approximately 80 aircraft have immediate failure risk similar to Ms. Sterling's jet. Marcus felt the numbers hit him like turbulence. 80 aircraft, 8 souls each on average, 640 lives hanging on inspections that had prioritized schedule over safety for 3 years. How is this possible? Don't facilities have oversight, quality control, regulatory audits? Pierce's expression was grim. They have all of those things, but oversight checks paperwork compliance, not technical judgment. Quality control verifies procedures were followed, not whether procedures are adequate. And regulatory audits happen quarterly, reviewing samples, not comprehensive records. He closed the folder. The system is designed to catch gross negligence. Mechanics who skip steps, falsify records, clear aircraft without inspection. It's not designed to catch competent negligence. Mechanics who follow procedures while systematically clearing marginal conditions. Competent negligence. Victoria repeated the phrase like she was tasting poison. That's what almost killed me. Not incompetence, but competence applied without judgment. Exactly. And it's endemic across private aviation. Pierce pulled up another document. I've requested records from 12 comparable facilities nationwide. Initial reviews suggest Apex's pattern is industry standard. Mechanics cleared a minimum tolerance because exceeding minimums costs clients time and money. Facilities prioritize retention over safety because competitive pressure makes thoroughness expensive. Isaiah's voice was quiet. So the whole industry is broken. The whole industry is optimized for efficiency over safety, and efficiency is measured by minimums met, not catastrophes prevented. Pierce looked at each of them. Your press conference yesterday started something I've been trying to start for 15 years. Within 6 hours, I had calls from 3 senators, the NTSB chairman, and the FAA administrator. Everyone wants to know why private aviation has become a statistical anomaly. Lower accident rates than commercial, but higher rates of preventable mechanical failures. He handed Victoria a document. This is a draft regulatory proposal. Mandatory predictive maintenance protocols, anonymous reporting systems, profit sharing for safety catches. Everything you announced you're implementing at Sterling Aerospace. If this passes and your press conference makes passage more likely, it becomes federal requirement within 18 months. Victoria scanned the proposal, her expression unreadable. This will bankrupt smaller operators. Good. If they can't afford to maintain aircraft safely, they can't afford to operate. Pierce's voice had steel. Aviation isn't a right. It's a privilege contingent on keeping people alive. The market can adapt or collapse. Marcus thought about the 127 people whose jobs he'd destroyed by testifying, about the smaller operators who'd close rather than meet new standards, about the economic devastation regulatory reform would cause. Then he thought about 80 aircraft flying with time bombs in their engines, About 640 souls trusting systems designed to fail slowly enough that nobody noticed until catastrophe. When do you need formal testimony? Pierce pulled out a calendar. Public hearings start April 24th, 2 weeks, NTSB-FAA Congressional Aviation Subcommittee. You'll testify about the technical analysis, the systemic pressure, the choice between career and conscience. He looked at Isaiah. You'll testify about junior mechanic experience, about the impossible position of seeing problems without authority to fix them. Isaiah nodded, pale but determined. Pierce continued. Expect attacks. Apex's lawyers will argue you had personal vendetta after being fired. Competitors will claim you're exaggerating to promote Sterling Aerospace. Industry groups will paint you as alarmist zealots trying to overregulate a safe system. His voice softened fractionally. But you'll have something they don't. Documentation, calculations, and the smoking crater of Victoria Sterling's $65 million jet as proof you were right. Victoria stood, walked to the window overlooking the bay. Colonel, if these regulations pass, Sterling Aerospace becomes the standard instead of the outlier. We go from industry pariah to regulatory requirement. That changes our competitive position entirely. Are you objecting to the regulations? I'm observing that doing the right thing is about to become profitable, which makes me question whether we're actually brave or just correctly predicting market forces. She turned back. I'd prefer to be brave, but I'll settle for regulatory compliance if it keeps people alive. Pierce almost smiled. Ms. Sterling, I've spent 40 years watching people choose profit over safety. The fact you're questioning your motives tells me your motives are probably fine. He pulled out another document. This is preliminary analysis of Sterling Aerospace's proposed protocols. If implemented industry-wide, we estimate it prevents approximately 240 failures annually. 37 of those would be catastrophic. Average souls per catastrophic failure, 7.3. That's 270 lives saved per year. The number hung in the air like prayer. Marcus did the math automatically. 270 lives per year, extrapolated over a decade. 2,700 people who'd live because he'd been brave for one press conference. Because Victoria had chosen principle over profit. Because Isaiah had admitted complicity instead of hiding behind youth. When you put it that way, the attacks seem manageable. Pierce's expression turned serious. Mr. Tate, the attacks will be vicious. Apex is retaining defense counsel. I've seen preliminary briefs arguing your calculations were flawed, your methodology unsound, your failure probability inflated for dramatic effect. They'll argue you cleared the aircraft because you genuinely believed it was safe, then invented the pressure narrative after it failed to deflect blame. Marcus felt ice in his stomach. Can they prove that? They'll try. They'll bring expert witnesses who'll testify that 81% failure probability was statistical impossibility based on manufacturer data. They'll argue no competent engineer would clear an aircraft they believed had 81% failure risk. Therefore, you either believed it was safe or you're lying about the probability. But I have documentation. Time-stamped photos, calculations, which they'll argue were created after the fact or misinterpreted. They'll claim the explosion was random chance, that your analysis was post hoc rationalization, that you're a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. Pierce leaned forward. Marcus, truth doesn't always win in legal proceedings. Reasonable doubt wins, and Apex's lawyers will create enough reasonable doubt about your expertise, your motives, your calculations that some percentage of observers will question whether you're hero or fraud. Victoria's voice cut through Marcus's panic. Then we bring our own expert witnesses, aerospace engineers who'll validate Marcus's methodology, material scientists who'll confirm the degradation curves, NTSB investigators who'll testify that the failure mode matches his predictions exactly. We'll do that, but understand, this becomes a war of experts, credentials, and institutional credibility. Apex has relationships with manufacturers, certification bodies, industry groups who benefit from status quo. Sterling Aerospace has a press conference and one destroyed engine. Pierce's tone wasn't discouraging, just realistic. You're David versus Goliath, except Goliath has legal teams and you have honesty. Historically, that's not a winning matchup. Isaiah spoke up, voice stronger than Marcus expected. But we also have 640 people who don't die because we changed the system. That's not theoretical. That's real lives saved by regulatory reform. True. And that's the narrative we'll push. Pierce closed his tablets. 2 weeks until hearings. Use the time to prepare. Review your documentation, verify your calculations, practice testimony until you can recite it under hostile cross-examination without hesitation, because they will try to break you, and if you break, the reforms die with your credibility. They left Pierce's office with 2 weeks to prepare for a battle that would determine whether Marcus Tate's catastrophic failure became catalyst for reform or cautionary tale about whistleblower hubris. The San Francisco morning was fog-thick, obscuring the bay in gray that felt symbolic. In the parking garage, Victoria turned to Marcus and Isaiah. I'm hiring a media consultant, someone who understands narrative warfare, who can help us frame the story before Apex's lawyers twist it. I'm also retaining our own expert witnesses, MIT professors, NTSB veterans, anyone with credibility who'll validate Marcus's analysis. That's going to cost millions. Marcus's voice was flat. Yes, and it's worth every dollar if it prevents the industry from burying this. Victoria's expression hardened. Marcus, they're going to come after you personally. Your divorce, your layoff from Boeing, every professional setback or personal failure. They'll paint you as bitter, vindictive, desperate for relevance. Are you prepared for that? Marcus thought about Denise, about the marriage that had collapsed under the weight of his obsession with work. Thought about Boeing laying him off at 50, about the rejection emails, about the apartment that felt like admission of failure. All of it was true. All of it would be weaponized. I'm prepared to tell the truth. If the truth makes me look bad, that's because I made bad choices. But the choices I made don't change the physics of blade degradation or the morality of clearing unsafe aircraft. Good answer. Remember it when lawyers are questioning your expertise based on employment history. Victoria looked at Isaiah. They'll come after you too. 24, minimal experience, obvious bias because you're Marcus's son. They'll argue you're parroting your father's analysis without understanding it. Isaiah's jaw set. Then I'll explain the analysis until they understand I'm not parroting anything. I ran the calculations myself, Dad, verified every number. I know why that engine failed, and I know why the system makes failure inevitable. Victoria nodded, something like approval in her expression. 15 days until we change an industry or get crushed trying. I've faced worse odds, but I've never faced them while being right, so this should be interesting. She left them in the parking garage, her Mercedes pulling away into fog that swallowed everything 10 feet ahead. Marcus and Isaiah stood beside the Camry, processing the magnitude of what they'd committed to. Dad, are we actually going to win this? Marcus wanted to promise victory, to reassure his son that courage guaranteed success. But he'd spent 52 years learning that reality didn't care about intentions. I don't know, son, but we're going to fight like we can, testify like it matters, and trust that truth eventually catches up to lies. He unlocked the car. And if we lose, if Apex's lawyers destroy our credibility and the reforms die, at least we'll lose standing in our principles instead of kneeling in our fear. Isaiah slid into the passenger seat. That's either wisdom or rationalization. Probably both. That's what 52 feels like, the ability to hold contradiction without needing resolution. They drove back to Oakland through fog that refused to burn off, through traffic that continued despite personal catastrophe, through a city indifferent to whether Marcus Tate was hero or fraud. The world kept turning. The question was whether Marcus could turn with it or break under the rotation. At a stoplight, Isaiah's phone buzzed. He checked it, went pale. What? Email from Apex's legal team. They're suing me for defamation, breach of confidentiality, and tortious interference with business relationships. Isaiah's voice shook. They want $2 million in damages. Marcus felt rage and fear compete for space in his chest. Forward it to Victoria. She'll connect you with lawyers. Dad, I don't have money for lawyers. I can barely afford rent. Sterling Aerospace will cover it. This is retaliation for testifying, and Victoria won't let them intimidate you into silence. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. But Isaiah, this is what Pierce warned about. They're going to make telling truth expensive. Are you still in? Isaiah stared at his phone, at the lawsuit that could bankrupt him before his career started, at the consequences of honesty. When he looked up, his eyes were wet but steady. I'm in. They can sue me, attack me, try to destroy me, but they can't change the fact that 8 people are alive because we told the truth. That's worth $2 million I don't have. Marcus felt pride and terror in equal measure. His son was learning courage at 24, learning it through fire and lawsuit in the particular way integrity cost more than comfort. Then we fight, together, whatever it costs. They drove the rest of the way in silence. 2 men who'd chosen truth over safety, integrity over employment, courage over the comfortable lie that clearing unsafe aircraft was someone else's problem. 15 days until the hearings, 15 days to prepare testimony that would either reform an industry or ruin them trying. Marcus Tate had spent 52 years chasing excellence defined by competence and career advancement. Now he was chasing a different kind of excellence, the kind where your value wasn't measured by what you accomplished but by what you refused to compromise. That evening, alone in his apartment, Marcus pulled out a photo from 1972, his grandfather in Tuskegee mechanic uniform standing beside a P-51 Mustang, tools in hand and pride in his eyes. The man who'd taught Marcus that physics defeated prejudice, that excellence spoke louder than discrimination, that a black man with knowledge could earn trust from people who'd never see him as equal. Marcus had spent 3 decades believing that lesson. Today he'd learned the second half his grandfather never got to teach him. That trust, once earned, became sacred. That betraying it, even once, even under pressure, even with justification, meant rebuilding from rubble instead of foundation. He texted Victoria, ready for war, whatever it takes. Her reply, good, because they're going to hit us with everything they have. And we're going to hit back with something they've never faced. Engineers who refuse to shut up. Marcus set down his phone and looked at his grandfather's photo, at the man who'd faced discrimination and poverty and institutional racism with nothing but tools and truth. I'm trying, Grandpa, Marcus whispered to the empty apartment. Took me 52 years and catastrophic failure, but I'm finally trying to be the man you thought I could be. The photo didn't answer, but somewhere in Marcus's chest, beneath the fear and exhaustion and uncertainty, something settled into place, not peace exactly, but purpose. The kind that survived attacks and lawsuits and industry backlash because it was rooted in something deeper than career or reputation. It was rooted in the simple, terrifying truth that some things mattered more than survival. And keeping people alive was one of them.